All right, we are recording. Well, thank you guys for being here for Evolve Fest, Surviving a Pandemic. I'm really lucky to have this opportunity to sit down with Sharmon and talk about the things we don't say. Hope for the Day's introductory program to teach you about proactive prevention and how each of us as peers in our community can be a part of breaking the silence, normalizing conversations about mental health so they're not quite so challenging, quite so difficult, and to remove some of these barriers and obstacles for people to get the help that they need. So when I say the things we don't say, Sharmon, it relates to this whole notion that we are often silenced in our community, and that could have happened from our own thoughts, that could have happened from our family, that could have happened from our school, our upbringing, our situation. There's many ways that stigmas can impact us and make us silent. And we want to be able to move beyond stigma. So this Things We Don't Say education is geared towards establishing some language, some better education and understanding, and some ways to inspire ourselves to impact those in our sphere of influence, to remind ourselves and others it's okay not to be okay. I just want to thank you again for letting me be a part of Evolve in the way that you have. So we'll get into it.
Most definitely. Thank you. And welcome to Evolve Fest. And thank you for everybody who's tuned in right now. Thank you for participating. So let's dive into it, Mike. We don't want to hold it too long. We want to get these people prepped up and ready for those challenging times. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And before we get started, just a quick little disclaimer. If you have any emotional reactions that you weren't anticipating when talking about suicide prevention and mental health, I want to affirm those feelings and remind you it's okay not to be okay. Whatever you feel is okay. And when people start telling us how to feel is where we run into stigmatizing behaviors and reactions. So we need to change how we talk about, think about, and respond to mental health for ourselves and for others that we care about. So let's dive right in with a warm-up video that I think you'll really enjoy. It just goes to show you how important it is that we talk about these things.
Mental health is very serious, and it can get very serious, and it can be very scary, and people don't want to talk about that.
For them, it's often bullshit, or it's just in my head.
They were afraid of it. When people think mental health, they automatically think like straitjacket, padded room.
I didn't have a proper outlet or a proper voice for a lot of things that I was feeling inside.
I've always had trouble with anxiety, depression.
In my last year of middle school was my first suicide attempt.
I was at a dark point in my life as well, but I managed to overcome with the help of friends, of course, and then also talking and sharing.
Asking for help is what saved my life.
If you're really lost and you don't know what to do, you can build on that and you can learn.
When I started talking about what I felt, it became a huge relief because they were incredibly understanding.
Talk about things, just talk.
You can make it acceptable to not be okay.
It's okay not to be okay.
Het is oké om je niet oké te voelen.
Ce n'est pas mal de ne pas se sentir bien.
It's okay not to be okay, it really is.
Proactive prevention stems from these simple ideas that we're not alone and that we matter. That's why this battle cry of proactive prevention, it's okay not to be okay, has been so powerful and resonated with so many different individuals, no matter their intersection, because let's be honest, we're prisoners of our own perception. We navigate this world through our intersections in which we identify. I'm just a white, straight, 37-year-old cisgendered male. I live on the north side of Chicago. I worked in Chicago public schools as an educator for almost a decade before coming to Hope for the Day. So I'm going to speak to my experience a little bit today. That doesn't mean that I have all the answers. I have perceptual blind spots, just like everybody. And the more we talk and share, the more we fill those in, the more we're able to lead with empathy and champion vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. Generational stigma would lead us to think otherwise, that mental health challenges are wrapped up with this not having enough power, willpower, or strength or competency, which is bullshit. Excuse my French, Sharmon. Our movement here, though, like, is about bringing all the people together in the community so we can talk about it directly. We're peer-led. We're clinically backed. So we have a lot of really wonderful people on our clinical advisory board that help us to understand the most relevant research and information out there to inform our education. But we're all peer-led because we find that it's more important to invite people to this conversation than it is to just talk about, what we think stigmas are. So the 3 ways that we do proactive prevention and remind ourselves and others it's okay not to be okay is we raise the visibility. We let people know this is an important human issue. If you have a brain, you experience mental health, both good and bad. It's not depression and sadness only. It's also your joy. It's also your excitement. It's also raising the visibility of resources out there so people can be a bridge to those appropriate supports. If we're having these conversations openly and being like, oh man, my friend needs some help. My mom needs some help. My sister needs some help. That way we can make sure that we disrupt people escalating to this crisis stage whenever possible. That requires education, because education is at the core of every revolution. We need language. When I was a kid and I was struggling, I didn't have any language. Therefore, I couldn't ask for help. Therefore, I couldn't really articulate the things that I was experiencing. And instead, I just felt shame and guilt, which further made me silent, right? Educating people that this is biological and that it is not, a credit to your character or anything like that. It's not like that. It's a medical experience. That's how we update it. Like, apps, they need updates. Well, mental health and the consciousness of our communities, we need an update real fucking bad. We need to share this information so that people can apply it and be inspired to take action in small but meaningful ways for themselves and for those around them, to begin practicing proactive prevention and then to continue it, because you're going to make mistakes unlearning something that you've had put upon you for a good chunk of your life. Anyway, I want to acknowledge that current realities are wild. Livelihoods have been impacted in varying degrees across a lot of different intersections. And that stress within an isolated experience of social distancing and surviving a pandemic, it's really important that we highlight a couple things out there and some other partners like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have some pretty good COVID resources, which the CEO of NAMI is going to tell you about real quick.
Hello, my name is Dan Gillison, and I am the CEO of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. As the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, NAMI is acutely aware of the additional challenges our communities face with the spread of coronavirus or COVID-19. Individuals with mental health conditions, caregivers, and loved ones are all grappling with the news. And we've heard from many people on NAMI's helpline about their unique needs and concerns. That's why NAMI has put together an information and resource guide to help folks cope with COVID-19, now available on nami.org/COVID-19. In it, we've answered frequently asked questions ranging from how to manage anxiety and social isolation to accessing healthcare and medications. NAMI is here to help and will continue to update our website as issues arise. If you are in a crisis, text the word NAMI, N-A-M-I, to 741-741, the crisis text line. We encourage you to take care of yourselves and check in on loved ones during this difficult time. We will get through this together. Thank you.
Damn straight, my man. And some great resources highlighted right there. The crisis text line can be utilized by anybody, just texting for immediate contact with somebody who's a crisis intervention specialist. Should you need the support yourself, or if you're trying to support somebody else. You can text any number of things. If you text NAMI or you text It's Okay to 741-741, you can engage in a conversation about what kind of supports you should be offering to someone you're kind of engaging with, or if you need some help. The other thing you mentioned in there is the NAMI Chicago helpline. During COVID, they've expanded to meet some basic needs as well. They also have a partnership with 311, which is non-emergency city services. If you call 311 and you ask to be connected to the NAMI Chicago helpline, that can really take a little bit of that burden off of, man, where do I go? Where do I start? Because those people on the NAMI helpline can be really helpful. You can give them your zip code and they can help you search. And I'm going to talk about the Hope for the Day Resource Compass as well, which is another zip code searching tool that can allow you to navigate some resources, including free and sliding scale mental health resources, but not limited to. There's some housing relief food relief, financial assistance, childcare, whole lot of different things that you can find out about at the Hope for the Day Find Help page, utilizing that resource compass, so that we can be proactive with prevention, so that we can raise the visibility of these tools out there, because there's a high likelihood that people don't know about the NAMI Chicago helpline. There's a high likelihood people don't know that if you call 311 and say, connect me with the helpline, that they'll do it. It's a high likelihood people don't know that there's a COVID lifeline, text line that is supportive of any number of things you might be going through right now. And when you're feeling bad, when you're being reactive to mental health and you allow yourself to get to that dark place, it can be really hard to reach out for help or utilize resources you know are there. So proactive prevention is about starting the conversation before shit hits the fan, before things are on fire, before things are messed up, just like we do with physical health. Sharmon, if I could ask you real quick, when you were a kid, you likely, if you ever had a tickle in your throat or you got the sniffles or whatever, you had some home remedies to try and take care of yourself so you didn't get sicker, right?
Right.
What would you do? What was your family go to?
So my mom is like the super health nut, and she was always like, drink this, drink that. So when we were younger, she would use like aloe vera, the plant. We would use that. We would have the gel. And then another thing she always was go to about was apple cider vinegar.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
right now, you know, it's cold season in Chicago. People are getting the flu, and hopefully we're hoping that, you know, COVID is decreasing. But as we know with numbers, it's been increasing. So definitely herbs and just natural remedies have always been the go-to for sure.
Yeah, and for me, like in college, if I had something coming on and I had a big week coming up, my roommate would be like, hey, get some Tussin, sleep it off. Or my grandma would call me and she'd be like, you make the soup yet? And I'd be like, no, grandma, I didn't make the soup yet. And then I make the soup, and, you know, hot liquids, tea, soup, whatever, lots of water, lots of sleep. Those things are like almost reflexive, like instincts that were kind of really programmed into us because we saw our parents taking care of their physical health in a proactive way. We saw our friends, we saw it on TV, we saw our school nurse. You know, there was a very conscious shaping of how we can respond to injuries. Like if you had an owie, even before you could talk, you could be like, you know, pointing at it, I'm hurt, help me out.
And
Mental
I'm
health,
glad
we don't have that.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're bringing this up, right? So for me personally, if you don't mind me sharing,
go for it.
My first anxiety experience was in 8th grade. Now, at that moment, I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't breathe, and literally my physical body was shaking. I was crying, and I just was like, my breath was very short, but I didn't know what was happening to me. And by the grace, my homeroom teacher was a science teacher. And so I was in the hallway about to go to homeroom, and everybody was laughing at me, and I was so embarrassed. And my teacher was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. And she was like, have you ever had panic attacks before? And I was like, I don't know. You know what I mean? But that was the first time I ever heard that word, panic attack. Like, and from there, that's when I began to kind of learn and know, oh, I may actually have panic attacks as like a thing, you know? And then by the age of 15, it grew to actual depression and anxiety. And so it literally took me to adulthood to know, or quote unquote be diagnosed as having depression and anxiety. So from 8th grade to literally about 2021, I had no knowledge of what to do. How do I handle my anxiety and depression? I never knew until I went to therapy, until I had, you know, services like NAMI and Hope for the Day. So yeah, let's talk about these preventive measures. We definitely want to share with people how to get started.
Yeah, and like just like any medical field, like you think about the advances made in cancer research and how they treat that. It takes a long time for it to become part of the common mindset. There's a lot of research out there that hasn't been applied, and people still operate under the assumption of information they learned that might be like based on notions or information from like the 50s and the 60s regarding mental health. And that can create some misinformed responses that reinforce stigma in this traditional prevention spectrum. So without getting too complicated with it, this diagram represents the world's simplest roller coaster. It goes up, goes down. This is something that clinicians utilize to kind of chart how people's mental health gets along that road, escalating to the crisis stage. So baseline right here on the bottom, that represents my typical behavior. Some expectation from my friends and my family and my coworkers have been set with my baseline. So that if I show up acting not like myself, they're probably gonna notice. And sure as shit, I know when I'm not myself. I know when I've woke up cranky on the wrong side of the bed. But traditionally, because of stigmas associated with mental health, when I experienced challenges growing up due to lack of education, lack of vocabulary, and a whole lot of fear of judgment, shame, and guilt, I would do anything or everything to feel better or to feel nothing at all, to hide and conceal the impact my mental health was having on my quality of life. Try and keep that mask up.
And I would definitely add too, as a Black American specifically, I know just within my own life and my own family structure, like it's not normal to be like, hey, I feel depressed, or right, hey, I'm feeling a little anxious today. You know, the first go-to is always pray about it. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? As far as prevention goes, right? And so it literally took almost suicidal attempts for my family to be like, I think she seriously needs help. And literally my mom dragged me to a counselor. Like, that's how I started, you know, that's how I started my healing journey, by my mom saying, I think something is wrong with my child. I need to take her somewhere, you know, and luckily my mom had that mindset. But like you said, Mike, some people don't know where to start. Some people don't know what normal looks like, you know, so let's break that down.
Yeah, normal is just a setting on a washing machine, right? We all have these beautiful, unique parts of ourselves that we sometimes feel like we got to hide because of stigma. And also as a result of us for generations and generations separating, compartmentalizing mental health and physical health in separate buckets when they're in fact braided together. If you've ever had like back pain and then it starts making you grouchy, that right there indicates that mental health and physical health are one and the same, and we each navigate various impacts to our quality of life as a result of both our physical and our mental health. And if I was to ask any group of people, chances are the answers would be the same. When do we hear about suicide in our community in open, honest conversations? How often do you hear about it in your estimation, Sharmon?
Honestly, this year it's been crazy because of COVID and just a lot of the stress of just the unknown, right? A lot of my friends have been reaching out and asking for help. Unfortunately, I had a friend who actually had someone who had to go to the hospital because of some very scary attempts that happened with her family member. And then, you know, my own personal family, just having those conversations. And luckily, you know, being that I've been trained, I've been able to provide those resources. But sometimes family members don't know, and they don't know where to go. They don't know where to start. And the scare, right? The scare of the person attempting, or the scare of finding things on their phone or on their Facebook, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily the gun to the head or the knife to the wrist. Sometimes a suicide attempt first starts with a Facebook status now. I don't feel good today. I feel like killing myself. Don't play with those. Like, those statuses are very serious. And even though we're in the age of memes, you know, seeing somebody posting memes about death, seeing people post dark jokes even, I would take those as warning signs and say, hey, is everything okay today? Should we hang out? You want to go to the park? What's going on? Because sometimes people, like you said, the stigma of saying I'm depressed scares people. So Facebook seems safe. And Facebook is the go-to now and I could just make a status and maybe people will pay attention, you know. That's just a few examples.
And that's really well said, because when we refer back to this diagram, a lot of times in my experience, I haven't heard about or talked about mental health or suicide openly unless something really bad has happened and it's a reaction to it. It's like, oh my God, someone died or someone tried.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it's a famous person, a lot of people are willing to talk about it, but that conversation doesn't get normalized. It fades away.
Yeah, like Kanye this year, I feel like was a great example of people breaking down the stigma of bipolar disorder, right? Because again, we saw public outbursts of Kanye on Twitter and online. And so I feel like him having his real life episode made other people who experience this with their families open up and say, hey, Kanye is having an episode, you guys. Like, I deal with it with my family. I saw a few people say that, you know, like, hey, I'm praying for Kim because I experienced this with my family, you know. And luckily, Kim Kardashian is humble enough to be open and honest with her own struggle as a wife and as a family member, saying, hey, I know my husband is having an episode, but I love him and I'm here for him, you know, versus being the typical Hollywood couple and dismissing that episode. So kudos to the Kardashians for one.
That's beautiful, because Kanye or a professional athlete or somebody that's in the military, doesn't matter. They're a human being first, right? And sometimes we get to this place where we're concealing, and then we cross over in that crisis stage where we can no longer conceal it. And it becomes very visible and very obvious to the people that care about us the most that something's up and that you need the help. And that's often when people are like, okay, I want to talk. I want to be of service. I want to be able to connect you to resources. And at Hope for the Day, we've just identified that this big missing piece of the puzzle is proactive prevention, where we can practice these conversations, make them easier to have, and hopefully disrupt escalation to crisis stage in the same way that we try to take care of our sniffles to prevent pneumonia. People will still arrive at the crisis stage, but will be better equipped to support people and not reinforce stigmas, because suicide is a mental health crisis. It impacts people all over the world from every walk of life. It does not discriminate. It does not have prejudice. There are high incidence groups. It does impact people of different cultural intersections and higher degrees. We have increased suicide rates in the broader LGBTQ plus community, in Black, Indigenous, persons of color communities, in underserved communities across the board. But you also have high incidence groups in entertainment, food and beverage and hospitality, military and first responder communities, because of some of the cultural endemic problems with those particular paths in life. So ultimately, the more we understand that, we start to understand where some of this misinformation comes from. People think a lot of things about suicide, but we need to help people to understand and update their ideas about suicide, that it's a part of a mental health spectrum.
Yes, and can you break down that stigma that suicide is an attention getting, right? Because I remember growing up, when somebody, you know, committed suicide, it was like, oh, they just wanted attention. But it's like, that was the point before that actual attempt or successful attempt, right? Yes, the wanting of attention was a way of actually asking for help, you know? And so can you break that stigma down, the whole idea that suicide is an attention-getting mechanism?
And, you know, some of the language that gets used in media and everyday conversation is born out of stigmas related to these ideas or opinions about those who have died by suicide, those who experience thoughts of suicide or self-harm. It boils down to this very harmful misinformation and passed down generational stigma that if you're struggling with your mental health, that means that you don't have enough strength, you don't have enough willpower, it's a flaw in your character, and maybe you're just not competent enough to deal with stuff. that can be dehumanizing. That can rob you of respect and dignity, just simply having that kind of opinion about suicide. But it's part of an intensive batch of symptoms that could come at that crisis point. There's often unaddressed or underaddressed mental health challenges that lead up to it. But words like when people say committed suicide or killed themselves, these are born out of criminalizing kind of deliberate language. And it comes from when religion permeated all facets of our life, where it was like the biggest social and cultural factor of the day. Like dating back to like Europe before the US was colonized and all that.
Great point,
Yeah,
Mike,
so the
because
whole idea where you can't be buried in your family plot if you died by suicide, because it's the biggest sin, more than adultery, more than murder, more than theft. And while that was misinformed then, it doesn't have to continue to be the type of thing that we reinforce, because those are the most damaging impacts of stigma in the modern day that like have hung around and create, you know, this transcends gender identity too. Like notions like boys don't cry, or the fact that you got to keep it together all the time and be this solid rock. Well, those reinforce this notion that in order to prove yourself in this world, that you have to perform masculinity, acts of masculinity where I'm tough, I'm strong, where we don't champion vulnerability as a strength, rather we see it as a weakness. And it's backwards. It's all backwards, because what's more human than thoughts, feelings, and emotions, AKA mental health? And all of us, as a community member, we may feel like we don't have any power to impact this problem, but that's not true. We can disrupt the highest risk factors before the crisis stage, because the biggest obstacle to effective prevention is the silence that stigma creates. And we can break the silence real well as a community if we all get on that same page and we all understand the problem. You cannot fix a problem that you are not talking about. There's no way to address it with solutions if you don't talk about it openly and honestly. So just for a second, I'm going to talk about national statistics before we get into how we move beyond stigmas. In America, on average, every single day, we lose 132 individuals to suicide completion in our communities.
Wow.
And each of those people represented by this icon, they have whole networks of people attached to them, their friends, their family, their coworkers, their church community, their, you know, their neighbors, their digital connections, which we found to be so important as we survive this pandemic. You start to do that math, 132 per day, with the power to impact another 100 individuals. Statistically speaking, so this is based in purely numbers, there's a high probability that every person you meet as you navigate the world has a story, has been impacted in some way by mental health and suicide, and probably has felt a lot of pressure not to talk about it. Or because of their family, or because of their school, or because of their own thoughts, or whatever it may be. And that might seem bleak, but the number one is why we at Hope for the Day, and why people like Sharmon at Evolve, this is the power of one, because prevention starts with a conversation, one we can all have. And I can attest that going through my life with a gradual buildup of pressure, trying to conceal the impact it was having on my quality of life, arriving at the crisis stage as a 31-year-old, teaching school, everybody expecting me to have it all together, when in fact I had been struggling on the inside and keeping it to myself for a long, long time. But it was individuals, single individuals, that had no idea what to do. But they did comment on the change in my behavior. They did muster the bravery to start some conversation, even though they were fearful of saying the wrong thing, and they weren't exactly sure what to do next. It's amazing how much we can help people have hope, and hope fights despair, simply by giving a shit and holding some space, and not trying to be a fixer, and not trying to give advice, but rather prioritizing validating the person's experiencing their experience and their pain, so that they feel like oh, you know what? It's going to be okay. This person gets it, right?
Yeah.
'Cause-
And like you said, Mike,
yeah.
validate their feelings. It's okay to say, hey, look, sister, I'm scared. You've been acting different. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes, like you said, that fear of the change makes the stigma bigger. But if you just be open and honest to your family and friends and say, hey, friend, or hey, family member, I'm a little scared. You've been acting different. Do you need some help? Let's go somewhere, you know?
Absolutely. And stigmas keep us silent. We define it at Hope for the Day as social and cultural factors that try to dictate how we can express ourselves. But more simply, I think of it as harmful stereotypes or these pressures from our society, this pressure to comply to some sort of status quo that might not fit us. And I don't know about you, but I don't like being told what to do. I don't like being told how to dress or how to wear my hair or how to talk. But stigmas create these ideas and these notions of boxes or slots that we got to fit into, when in fact, that can be really stigmatizing for a number of reasons based on all the beautiful ways we identify either socially or culturally, right? As a white person, as an able-bodied person, as a cisgendered person, I have a lot of privilege, and stigmas don't often stack up on me as much as they do other individuals. But we need to validate experiences, no matter what they are, if they're giving a person pain and creating that pressure. For me, growing up, I looked around at all the male influences in my life and I saw emotional behavior only being normalized when it was anger or frustration or hulking out or fighting or slamming a table or cursing. And those types of things being normalized has bred that toxic masculinity that people think about when they think about problems with, how we address those who identify male. But this transcends that gender identity, because all of those things that applied to me growing up that made it hard for me to cry, even though I felt like crying a lot most of the time, they've created a lot of pressure for people who identify as female or people that are non-gender conforming in workplaces and things like that, where tears can be perceived as a lack of strength, and maybe you'll be passed over for a promotion or not be given certain opportunities, professionally speaking. Sharmon, have you experienced stigmas like that?
All the time. Like I'm that person. I'm that overly emotional person. And I have to walk away often because, one, I hate stigmas. I hate that feeling of being judged, right? I hate that feeling of assuming that because I'm crying, I can't handle myself or my emotions. And two, just being in a professional setting, like you said, because I deal with depression and anxiety, it's assumed that I can't complete work, right? Like that's one of the biggest stigmas I hate, is that if you're depressed, you cannot complete work. And that varies for a lot of people. In my case, I'm kind of high functional depressive, meaning even though I'm depressed, I can still work. I can still engage. Where some people, they completely can't. They have to stay in the bed for a few days, or they may have to take medications just so they can get through their workday, you know? So it varies for so many people. And my biggest concern, or I would say my biggest suggestion, is going forward, if you hear a label of someone, i.e. say bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, don't freak out. Ask questions. Asking questions is way more safe than assuming. Like you said, stereotypes are no fun. And I think movies like The Joker, personally for me, I felt like the new Joker was a great movie because I feel like it humanized him prior to him becoming the quote unquote villain that we see, right? And so sometimes movies can be good, but sometimes movies can push stigmas too.
For sure. I've often heard movies referred to, and TV too, like the series that come out these days are very cinematic, how they're empathy machines, and that can be both good and bad. Like most of the time, what you're kind of referring to is the stigma associated with mental illness or a diagnosis. If I have a mental health disorder diagnosis, therefore I'm this way. When stigmas do this thing where they fill in the blank about a person before any questions are asked, based on very visible or very judgmental kind of preconceived notions. I live with bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed when I was 31, and I'm 37 now. And I realize that if I tell that to some people, they're going to have some thoughts about me. And those thoughts may be informed by the movies that they've seen, where they only have this very limited understanding of what bipolar is. And they think that I'm just going to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that I'm going to be this very different person from day to day with super high highs and super low lows. And while some of those experiences do categorize the illness that I live with, it's a medical experience that I manage and I fight like hell to heal from and persistently try to build up my resiliency so that I can maintain a healthy and fulfilled life. Chances are the people that you know in your life, if they have a diagnosis or not, you might not be able to tell, because sometimes that's not information we're forthcoming with due to stigmas that exist.
Speaking of, when you first got diagnosed, what went through your brain? I'm pretty sure there were some stigmas that were like, what? I'm who?
At 31 years old, I think it was almost a relief for me in a way, because I was very manic when I received the diagnosis. So my mania is characterized by racing thoughts, kind of to the degree that I start to kind of get almost visibly, it seems like I'm high to somebody, like they think I'm on cocaine or acid or something like that, mushrooms, whatever. And very positive, but very speedy, very speedy.
I understand.
Yeah. And so for me, it was like, oh, okay, now I kind of know something that I've kind of suspected all along since I was like 13 years old and having a hard time looking around at the world and being like, man, I feel things different than other people. I'm not like other people. And that isolates you when you're young and you don't have people to talk to about that. But it even creates isolation and experiences of isolation as you grow up and you navigate the world, because stigma's everywhere. It's everywhere, unfortunately. And we can do a really great job of calling it out if we understand that stigmas not only are like that exist around mental health, they also created things like misogyny and transphobia and homophobia and racial prejudice and any harmful stereotype that has us jumping to these preconceived notions about a person or their experience and the impact it's had on them. And that has shaped a monolith, or like a hierarchy of experience, where we try to place a value on people's experience if they're brave enough to talk about it. So if I was having a really hard time over the course of a great many weeks, and I finally am like mustering the courage to talk to my support network and say, hey, I'm not okay, I need some help. I might even, fall back into these old ideas and look around and compare my experience, my pain, all that to those around me and say, well, it's not that serious yet. So I'm going to shut up about it. I'm going to just keep trying to push it down until I run out of room, quite frankly. That's kind of how I operated growing up. That is definitely a good example of how we often minimize or dismiss our own experiences as, important or significant enough to ask for help with. And that also stems from ideas about what trauma is and what trauma is not. We call them psychological injuries instead of traumas at Hope for the Day, because it normalizes and tries to level that playing field. And it also indicates that, like, an injury, people know, oh, I'm hurt, there's pain, it requires healing. So psychological injury is deliberately used to try to not box anybody out. If somebody has this idea of trauma from movies, they might think it's only visible, intensive things like explosions and death and violence, right? When in fact, that might make somebody that feels traumatized by an experience that is not that isolated and like, well, what's wrong with me? Therefore, psychological injuries includes everybody.
And sometimes trauma can simply be losing a friend, right? Like if you've been friends with someone for 10 years and all of a sudden they ghost you. Or, you know,
Grief.
I know ghosting has been like one of the biggest topics this year, because with dating, a lot of people have been ghosting each other now. And it's literally been researched, the psychological effects of ghosting. So something as simple as dating can be a trauma. So please don't assume that trauma only deals with death, like Mike said.
I think, and grief doesn't always have to do with death either. Like, I think what you said so articulately is that there's experiences in our life that creates this grief response. And it can be losing somebody close to us, like because they have passed away due to illness or something tragic, or even died by suicide. And that can be deeply, deeply impactful to our quality of life. And it can result in a psychological injury that will require healing. And you might even be grieving a previous sense of your life as we focus
like
on
a job,
yeah.
right? COVID
Right.
took a lot of our jobs, and we're like, you know, Evolve Fest this year is about surviving a pandemic, right? So what if I worked with this company 30, 20 years, and out of nowhere they're like, yeah, don't come tomorrow, and
Yeah, we
I don't have an
anything for you
answer
to
for
do.
you. Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know why. Just don't come tomorrow. And this lasts for 3-4 months. Some people are still to this day still not working. So that's trauma. Trust me, that's trauma, you guys. And it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, the collective trauma we've all gone through together over the last 7 months plus, it's palpable. And if you feel that you're having trouble focusing, or your energy level's not what it should, or you're maybe having a hard time regulating your emotions, it's okay not to be okay. This is taxing emotionally to have to navigate and constantly be experiencing anxiety and all this uncertainty. It takes a toll. So we need to prioritize rest and self-care, obviously, as a community to survive this pandemic. But if we think about other examples where we're trying to be supportive of people, I need to only use an example of like a kid. A kid says, hey, I'm isolated, I'm lonely. And then they start to tell you as an adult about their experience. It might be very easy to roll your eyes or scoff when they say, you know, I don't got enough people on following me on TikTok, or people are being mean on Snapchat, or any number of things like that, where you're like, well, that's not that big of a deal. That's not that serious. You should get over that. Let's put the phone down. Let's do something else.
Right?
And you're well-intended in your heart, and you're really trying to, you know, get out of this situation where that kid feels bad, but you send this message of minimizing and dismissing their experience instead of validating their experience. Hey, that sucks. I'm really sorry. I don't know what that's like, because I didn't have TikTok when I was a kid, and I didn't even have a smartphone or Wi-Fi or any of that shit. I had dial-up, America Online, those little discs, you know? So, you know, like being able to understand that even though we're well-intended, it was shaped by this really bad idea of a hierarchy. There is no hierarchy. There's no pain Olympics. It's not a pissing contest. It never should be. We need to knock that shit on its side. We need to karate chop it on over and remind people whenever we can that mental health is a spectrum of visibility, and that there's more visible things that can be traumatic or register as emotionally intensive for a person, and there's things that are completely invisible. I want to think about a car accident for a second. Somebody got wicked whiplash. They got a neck brace on. That's visible. You see their injury. You see them having a hard time kind of moving around. It heals up. The brace comes off. What you don't see is that person might experience tightness of the chest or some very intensive anxiety boarding a bus to go to work, or getting in a car to go meet some friends. So that just goes to show you that the more visible things, we've had a lot of opportunities to understand the impacts of things like violence or neglect or abuse. But the less visible things, the things that happen inside of us based on our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, well, pain is relative. And we all experience these things on the inside. And the only way we're able to kind of share the impact it's having is by bravely sharing our stories and being heard. And we do that by respecting the dignity of the individual, of each human life, for ourselves first, and then for other people. because you rob your self-respect and dignity. You do when you say that my problem's not big enough to ask for help, and you decide to push your health, your fulfillment to the side because of stigmas, and you don't think you should be talking about this stuff. Well, right there, you've taken some respect and dignity away from yourself. And this mantra, it's okay not to be okay, is something I remind myself of constantly. Because I still make mistakes. I don't always perfectly practice proactive prevention. Because when I'm feeling shitty, it's hard to ask for help. When I'm feeling shitty, it's hard to use my coping skills.
Yeah. And it's not weak to ask for help. Like, I feel like personally within my community, within the Black community specifically, because that's, you know, where I mostly was raised and around, you were looked at as weak if you asked for help, right? And so I'm telling you, as somebody who's been there, it's okay to be like, hey, I don't got it together today, man. I don't got it together. Because you get way more respect by simply just saying, I don't have it together today, versus not being okay, trying to do it and failing. That just makes the situation way worse. So it's okay to just be like, hey, I don't got it today.
Yeah, and with that, if somebody came to you and you're really trying to start these conversations and keep these conversations going, and they say something that you have no frame of reference from, like you have never experienced it yourself, it's okay to say so. You can still respect somebody and validate them and make them feel seen and heard by saying, I've never been through something like that, but I can see it's giving you pain and I want to help. Because you might be the first person to validate them in their whole lives. Like, that's not a hyperbole or an exaggeration. There's a lot of people that struggle in silence and don't have anybody in their lives that's given them that space to express what they feel is unexpressible. Because we don't understand mental health like that. We don't prioritize this education that mental health is simply the health of your brain. Just like cardiac health is your heart and pulmonary health is your lungs. It's just another organ, and it's the big boss organ. It controls all the other stuff. And it's happiness and excitement too. If you eat your favorite food or you laugh your face off at your favorite comedian, that's your mental health too, because it's all a result of chemicals produced throughout your body, mainly within your brain. And just like somebody with diabetes, if their organ, the pancreas, isn't producing the right amount of stuff, it can impact their health. But they can also have different strategies to maintain a healthy and fulfilled life with regard to their medical experience, their medical diagnosis. Me with bipolar disorder, I know my diagnosis. I can take steps and support from professionals to maintain the healthiest and fulfilled life possible for me. It's hard to start these conversations because we don't know what to say and we're worried about saying the wrong thing. So we're going to introduce something now, the soda bottle analogy, that makes these conversations infinitely easier, and a message from our founder and CEO, Johnny Boucher.
Mental health, like physical health, is something we all have. When we talk about mental health, it's usually about depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide. But what's not said is that it affects us all. Think of our mind like a bottle of soda. Life shakes us up. And inside, the pressure builds. That pressure is looking for somewhere to go. And if we don't release it, it grows. It grows to the point where we can't enjoy the things we used to, we can't leave the house, or even get out of bed. We have to find moments to open up and release it. It can be as small as sitting still and taking a deep breath. When we talk to each other about what's bothering us, the cap comes off and pressure releases. Forget the stigma. All of us need to talk about our mental health. Start the conversation with hope for the day. We are in this together.
All of us need to talk about it because we all have a brain. And if we think of our brain as the great unifier, and we imagine that it's been transformed into a bottle of soda, we magically have a tool that is free of labels, it's free of medical vernacular, and it helps to make this conversation much easier. It doesn't assume a problem or a diagnosis. It also gives us a very tangible item, the soda bottle, to conceptualize the impact mental health has on all of us. You shake up a soda bottle, that pressure builds, it looks for a place to go. Self-expression allows us to valve out that pressure without exploding. And then that exploding point, that's the crisis stage that we're trying with proactive prevention to disrupt escalation to. Now, when we want to embed this into our culture, we can start off with just a simple check-in with our friends, our family, and our coworkers. What's shaking your bottle? Because then you hold this space where people can at least get one thing off their chest and relieve a little bit of pressure through talking. And it also helps to change the culture. It helps to practice, hey, it's okay talking about this stuff. Because there's a lot of different things that can shake your bottle. And I've seen this check-in, what's shaking your bottle, work in classrooms. I've seen it work in family settings at the dinner table. I've seen it work in corporate environments for team meetings before they get down to business. I've seen it work in correctional facilities. I'm not joking. What shaking your bottle can be really an effective way to change the mood and how we have these conversations, because it's not as heavy. External things that shake our bottle happen outside of us, and they can create a trauma or psychological injury if they're emotionally intensive enough. We're all sensitive to different things. So creating a list, well, that would box people out. So we have to honor that no one gets to tell you what's trauma for you, and that things can happen gradually over time that build up to that crisis stage, or it can be a very sudden experience. It can happen directly or indirectly. It doesn't matter if you saw violence firsthand or if you heard gunshots in the distance. These things can be traumatic for individuals. We must respect the dignity of the individual. Internal factors that shake our bottle, these are the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions, the things on the inside no one can see that are shaking us up. And sometimes they're directly related to circumstances that are stressful. But sometimes they're related to a medical diagnosis like I had, where my thoughts, feelings, and emotions have the potential to be so impactful to my quality of life that I was hospitalized in a crisis stage. I was unsafe, and I was diagnosed and able to then begin the very, very challenging road of resiliency and recovery to establish a new baseline. But this helps us to get it out in the open and talk about what's shaking our bottle, the things that are stressing us out, because a lot of times talking is one of the greatest valves to releasing that pressure. But there's no magic wand. There's no one pill, one doctor, one strategy that's going to work every time for everybody. We need to acknowledge this. It's not Disney Channel shit, right? We got to be real that some people medication is really helpful for, and some people it's really frustrating to navigate that road. And therapy, you can try it and it can be really, really effective for you. But very often people will try therapy. They'll try one provider. They'll be like, this sucks. Therapy blows.
And give up.
But if you went to a restaurant, Sharmon, and you thought the food sucked and you thought the service was shitty, would you go back to that restaurant?
No. And like, that's a great example when we talk about stigma and help, right?
Yeah.
One of the stigmas about getting help, the first stigma is you're crazy, right? Yeah. Let's end that there. You're not crazy. You're figuring it out. You're trying to figure out what works for you. So just like you'll go to a restaurant and you'll order a meal and you didn't know it was cheese on it and you're probably lactose, think about looking for a provider the same way. Sometimes you don't know what you don't need until you see what you don't need. Is the best way I can explain. You gotta try some things out. You gotta try. You have to try some things out. You have to, like cooking, you have to try spices out before you find that perfect recipe for you. And so as somebody who personally has done 2 separate counseling methods, I tried the natural healing method as well as the medical method, meaning going to a counselor, a psychiatrist. There are so many versions of healing, you guys. There's so many different concepts to healing. And so going to a psychiatrist is not the only form, you guys. That's one of the multiple forms, okay? So please don't get scared or feel like you're not able to heal because that one system does not work for you. And also, as Mike said, with the magic wand concept, don't freak out if a doctor says you may have to take medication. Instead, ask questions. ask what's in the medicine and how does this help my body, right? Because a lot of different herbs and certain tools that doctors use are specific for your diagnosis, meaning your brain is just like your stomach. If you put certain chemicals in your brain, it assists your brain to functionally go. Just like eating an apple, quote unquote, an apple a day keeps depression away, right? Those things are real. I know that sounds so silly, but sometimes a simple food or a simple spice that you add to your meal every day can literally change your mood and how you deal with your day and your depression or whatever mental illness you're dealing with.
Yeah, there's like two tracks to this. If you have trauma or you have a psychological injury to heal, engaging with professional support, be it a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor, a therapist, a social worker, there's all sorts of different things. You could even go to a life coach or try group therapy or a support group type of professional kind of support. And that can be very healing, that can. And then it's important to acknowledge that through therapy, I've learned a lot of management skills. I've been able to bolster my self-care by just talking to people about what works for them. Because a lot of times, since we don't offer up a lot of options and we silence these conversations, people will be desperate and they'll try numbing themselves with substances, alcohol, drugs, whatever. Some people will engage in self-harming behaviors like cutting, and those are stigmatized even more. So if somebody in your life happens to be showing very visible indications that their pressure is building to that crisis stage, rather than stigmatizing what they are doing to try and relieve the pressure, like, oh, stop doing that, don't do that. Remember, they're indicating to you that, hey, I need a little help, even though they're not saying so. So being able to be that bridge in those situations is really important. Being able to champion the valves and coping skills that work for us, and being a teammate and support and inviting people to join us rather than shoulding people, being like, you should do this, because that's not always the best approach either. That's how we can create a way where we truly have the tools to disrupt escalation of the crisis stage, so that we can check in with our friends and family. If we notice that they're not themselves, we can say, hey, you okay? We'll keep it simple. You okay? You don't seem like yourself lately. It's okay not to be okay. Because those simple prompts, those simple engagement kind of words can open that door for a conversation here when the problem's more manageable and prevent escalation of that crisis stage. We all can do that simply by just giving a shit and having our nuance turned up. Oh, my friends, my family, my coworkers, the people I know really well, they might be a little out of sorts right now with surviving a pandemic. So I'm going to check in with them more frequently and give them the opportunity to have these conversations. Because if we show people it's okay to talk about mental health, that is in reality the best way that we as community members can be a part of preventing suicides. We can't change people's choices. We can't control their ideas or things that they're going to decide to do. But we can create environments around ourselves in our sphere of influence where we lessen the most damaging impacts of these stigmas, and we lessen the silence. We break that silence. And I want to share with you a really powerful speech from Johnny from Warped Tour when he spoke to a sea of people, saying just that we need to do this with urgency, with intensity, with passion. So check this out.
Right now, while we are all here today, we are losing more people to suicide than ever. 121 people every day take their life here in America. And it's because we're scared to talk. We're scared to open up our hearts and our minds to our friends and family, but more importantly, to ourselves, to remind ourselves that if we are struggling, then it's okay not to be okay. So I want to invite you, if you are struggling today with thoughts of suicide, self-harm, depression, or life is just kicking you in the ass, stop by our tent. Talk about this shit. Because if we started talking about it, we realize that we're not fucked up, we're not crazy, we're not insane. We are humans, and we are one and the same. We are going through life.
So when you start talking, here's some tips for being supportive of your people. Listen when someone's having a mental health challenge. Save that space for them to talk and listen to understand. Set aside your preconceived notions about the person or their experience. Try not to criticize or be judgmental. Minimizing happens when we start to jump to those judgments, and we might not understand what they're going through. So we can say so and still have that respect and dignity for that person reserved. When we're asking questions, it's important to steer clear of why questions. They can have a judgmental tone that might make the person feel like they got to justify their feelings before they can talk openly. And that could shut down a conversation. That's not what we want. We want to ask questions like, what happened? How long has this been happening? And really resort to affirmations like nodding and saying, oh man, I can't imagine. Or I had no idea you were in so much pain. Those things really go a long way in letting that person release pressure through talking. The last three go together. Give information, don't label people and diagnose them. If you think there is a diagnosis in play, connect them. Act as a bridge to professional supports and services and help them navigate that stuff. That's the best way to be a teammate and support, to share the things that help us, both professional supports and community supports, and be that bridge. Because connection is the currency of wellness. You're not signing up to be a fixer. You don't have to have all the answers or give advice when somebody says, hey, this is what's going on with me. Sometimes it's even better to just be a trusting ear and an encouraging voice. You want to keep your own boundaries. You're not a therapist. You don't want to say, I'll be there 24/7, because that could give false hope. You want to be very concrete. Hey, I get off work at 5. Let's go for a socially distanced walk. Walking has helped me a lot as far as relieving some of the pressures and stuff of our current realities. But ultimately, if you get to a place where you're worried about their safety, you may need to enact a crisis response. And this is really important that you listen closely on this point. Because of the reality that law enforcement, when engaging in a mental health crisis, we can't guarantee safety. I want you to understand, if you ever think that there's an imminent risk of harm to an individual or the others around them, it's okay to practice regular first aid and get their body safe. If you have to call 911, this is what you should say to a dispatcher when regarding a mental health crisis. I need an ambulance at this address for a mental health crisis. Whenever it's applicable, tell them the person's nonviolent. Tell them you're going to stay with them to connect with medical professionals so they'll be on their best damn behavior when they arrive. Treat it as a medical experience and offer up as much information as you can and take them seriously. You may want to ask a person directly if they're having thoughts of suicide or self-harm, and that's okay too, because you give them the permission to express what may feel unexpressible. But the important thing is connecting with medical professionals, not law enforcement. We want to also honor that some people will never feel comfortable dialing 911. So should you be one of those people, despite the things you've been through, it's okay not to be okay. And there are national emergency resources available 24/7 nationwide. Here are just 9 of them: the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line, the Trevor Project for the LGBT Youth, National Sexual Assault Hotline, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, Melanin and Mental Health, the Veteran Crisis Line, the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, and Therapy for Queer People of Color. These are just some. There's a lot more out there. We've just scratched the surface of tools. So if you follow us on social media, you'll also be able to share helpful social media graphics that can also help start these conversations in your community. And you can be an agent of impact. If you go to hftd.org and you click Find Help, that's where you can find the resource compass that can be really useful in helping navigate resources. Should somebody in a different state or city or even country hit you up and be like, I need some help, you can then utilize our resources to be that bridge. If we do that all together, we'll have incredibly amazing results. We'll never be able to quantify how far this work can go if we all continue to press these conversations passionately in our sphere of influence on the days that we feel up to it. By pressing these conversations, by reminding yourself and others it's okay not to be okay, we remove stigmas from the world, one little bit at a time. And that way people can get help that they need so that they don't end up being lost like so many others that have come before. So I want to thank Evolve and Sharmon for having Hope for the Day involved. And I can't wait for the future of more work together. It's been amazing being with you today. So continue to stay safe.
Absolutely.
Take care.
And thank you so much, Mike, for showing us how to survive in this pandemic and how to help our family and friends. Like, thank you for sharing that amazing resource page. If you could go back again to the resource page with the phone numbers.
Oh, yeah.
These numbers, please, if you can screenshot them or write them down. These numbers are so important, especially in light of what's been going on with humans against, humans versus police right now, human bodies versus police. This is not to shun the police. This is not to say that we do not support police personnel. This is simply saying that mental health is a real crisis and it should not be stigmatized, but it also shouldn't cause violence, So if you have a family or a friend who is dealing with this, as Mike said, it is okay to call 911. Just be very clear and also be very calm with the person you're around, because just speaking from experience, as somebody who has had episodes, that is the biggest fear when you're having an episode, when your person around you, you can't trust them, let alone a police officer coming and making it worse, So it's okay, guys. Don't be afraid. Thanks to Mike, now you have these awesome tools, these awesome resources. And again, Hope for the Day is always there to help you out. So follow them on social media and also hit up Mike. He's also always, responsive as well. Make sure you follow him and stay tuned. We have so much more coming up in Evolve Fest 2020. Bye.
All right.